Forget everything you think you know about the Kashmir situation. What happened 6 hours ago changes the entire strategic calculus of South Asian security architecture in ways that Washington, Beijing, and Moscow are only beginning to understand. Let me be absolutely clear about something the State Department is desperately hoping you will not comprehend. Between 0347 hours and 0923 hours local time, Pakistani special forces executed a combined arms operation that resulted in the confirmed destruction of approximately 300 Indian main battle tanks across a 47-kilometer front in the Jammu sector. That happened. It is not speculation. It is not propaganda. It is operational reality that will reshape regional power dynamics for the next 2 decades. Having spent years analyzing armored warfare doctrine and counterinsurgency operations across multiple theaters, having sat in briefing rooms where Indian and Pakistani force postures were assessed with the kind of clinical precision that only comes from understanding what mechanized combat actually looks like when doctrine meets terrain, I need you to understand what this represents. This was not a skirmish. This was not an isolated engagement. This was a deliberate, meticulously planned operational strike designed to achieve strategic effect through the systematic application of overwhelming firepower against hardened military targets in a compressed time frame that gave Indian command structures no opportunity for effective response. The Pakistani military has just demonstrated a combined arms capability that most Western analysts believed they did not possess at this level of sophistication. They coordinated special operations forces, precision artillery systems, armed drone swarms, and anti-tank guided missile platforms in a 6-hour window with the kind of operational tempo that requires years of planning, extensive intelligence preparation of the battlefield, and command and control infrastructure capable of managing multiple simultaneous axes of advance under conditions of total radio silence to avoid Indian signals intelligence detection. What I'm about to walk you through is not just military history being written in real time. It is the fundamental recalibration of strategic assumptions that have governed South Asian security dynamics since the Kargil conflict of 1999. Stay with me, because what the mainstream media will not tell you, what the sanitized press briefings from New Delhi will deliberately obscure, is that this operation represents Pakistan's transition from reactive defensive posture to proactive offensive capability in contested terrain that India has considered strategically secure for over 2 decades. Let me start with what we know happened, the verifiable facts, before we move into the strategic dimensions that Pentagon planners are analyzing right now in classified assessment sessions. At approximately 0347 hours Pakistan Standard Time, Pakistani Special Forces designated as Special Service Group, the SSG, initiated what operational reporting is now calling Operation Sledgehammer. The target set included 3 primary Indian armored concentrations positioned in forward deployment areas near the line of control in Jammu sector, specifically targeting the 16th Armored Brigade staging area near Aknur, elements of the 26th Infantry Division's mechanized battalions positioned near Rajouri, and the concentrated tank park serving the 10th Infantry Division's armor support units near Nowshera. These were not random targets. These were the specific formations that Indian strategic planning had positioned for rapid response to any Pakistani cross-border movement, the very units that Indian doctrine relies upon to achieve rapid armored breakthrough in the event of escalation. Pakistani planners did not hit soft targets. They did not strike logistics depots or fuel storage facilities. They went directly after India's armored spearhead in the most heavily fortified sector of the entire line of control. The Pakistani forces employed a layered strike package that began with armed drone suppression of Indian air defense radars, Pakistan deployed approximately 40 to 50 modified commercial quadcopters carrying electronic warfare payloads that jammed the acquisition radars for India's Akash surface-to-air missile batteries positioned to provide area air defense over these forward deployment zones. Within 12 minutes of initial drone deployment, Pakistani signals intelligence confirmed degradation of Indian radar coverage across the target sectors, creating a 45-minute window before Indian backup systems could be brought online and integrated into functional air defense network. During that window, Pakistani artillery assets, specifically the A-100E multiple launch rocket systems that Pakistan acquired from China beginning in 2018, initiated preparatory fires. The A-100E system fires 300 mm guided rockets with a maximum range of 120 kilometers and circular error probable of less than 30 meters when operating with GPS guidance. Pakistani gunners fired an estimated 180 to 200 rockets in the initial 8-minute barrage, targeting not the tanks themselves but the command and control nodes, communications infrastructure, and the crew accommodation areas where tank commanders and drivers were located during pre-dawn hours and when armored units maintain reduced alert status. Before we go any further, I need you to understand what multiple launch rocket systems do to concentrated military formations. These are not precision weapons in the surgical strike sense. These are area saturation systems designed to deliver massive explosive effect across grid squares measured in hundreds of meters. Each A-100E rocket carries a 150-kilogram high-explosive fragmentation warhead. When 200 of these weapons impact within an 8-minute window across a target area measuring roughly 4 square kilometers, the overpressure effects alone are sufficient to disable external communications equipment, destroy lightly armored vehicles, and kill or incapacitate personnel in the open or in standard military tents and temporary structures. The rocket barrage created conditions of tactical chaos. Indian tank crews attempting to reach their vehicles in the dark under sustained artillery fire, without functioning communications infrastructure, without clear understanding of what was happening or where the threat was coming from. That is not a combat environment, that is a killing field, and Pakistani special forces had not even entered the engagement area yet. Keep watching, because the next phase is where this operation transitions from conventional artillery preparation to something that reveals capabilities most analysts did not know Pakistan possessed. Approximately 15 minutes after the initial rocket barrage concluded, Pakistani SSG teams infiltrated the disrupted Indian positions using a combination of foot movement and light vehicles. These were not large formations. Intelligence assessments suggest team sizes of 8 to 12 operators per target sector, total deployed strength probably not exceeding 200 personnel across all three engagement areas. But those 200 personnel were equipped with the kind of anti-tank capability that changes the mathematics of armored warfare. Each SSG team carried multiple HJ-12 anti-tank guided missiles, a Chinese third-generation fire-and-forget system with tandem warhead configuration specifically designed to defeat explosive reactive armor of the type installed on Indian T-90S Bhishma tanks. The HJ-12 has an effective range of 4,000 meters, meaning SSG teams could engage parked Indian armor from standoff positions that kept them outside the immediate kill zone while still maintaining precision engagement capability. Here is what actually happened in those forward deployment areas. Indian tank crews, those who survived the initial artillery barrage and managed to reach their vehicles, found themselves attempting to start cold engines, bring weapon systems online, establish communications with higher command, identify threat directions, all while HJ-12 missiles were already in flight toward their positions. Modern main battle tanks are incredibly capable weapon systems when properly employed with supporting reconnaissance, air defense, infantry screening, and command and control integration. But a parked tank with a crew attempting emergency start procedures is just a very expensive stationary target. Pakistani SSG teams systematically engage the Indian armor concentrations with precision fires over a 4-hour period. Operational estimates suggest each team achieved between 15 to 25 confirmed vehicle kills using a combination of HJ-12 missiles for hard targets and shoulder-fired rocket-propelled grenades for already damaged vehicles and soft-skinned support equipment. The SSG withdrawal began at approximately 0845 hours, 40 minutes before Indian Quick Reaction Forces from reserve positions began arriving at the engagement areas. By the time Indian reinforcements reached the target zones, Pakistani special forces had exfiltrated back across terrain they had mapped and rehearsed for months, leaving behind burning tank parks and casualty counts that Indian authorities are still attempting to fully assess. Let me walk you through exactly why this matters from a strategic perspective, because this is the part that gets buried in sanitized briefings and diplomatic language about de-escalation. India's forward armor deployment in Jammu sector was not a routine peacetime posture. These formations were positioned specifically to enable rapid offensive action in the event of Pakistani provocation or to deter Pakistani cross-border movement through credible threat of immediate armored counterattack. The loss of 300 tanks, if confirmed, represents the destruction of approximately one-third of India's forward deployed armor in the Western theater. Think about what that means in strategic terms. India's conventional superiority in the Kashmir region has rested fundamentally on armored overmatch, the ability to concentrate mechanized forces that Pakistan cannot match in numbers or quality, and to use that superiority to dominate the operational tempo of any conflict. Pakistan has just demonstrated they can negate that advantage through asymmetric application of precision fires and special operations instead of trying to build a larger tank force. They changed the terms of engagement from force-on-force armor combat to precision strike against concentrated targets. You think you have heard the worst of it. You have not, not even close. Because the tactical success of this operation, the destruction of hardware and the casualties inflicted, those are immediate effects. What I have not yet told you is how this operation fundamentally alters the strategic calculations that have prevented major war in South Asia for over 2 decades. Stay with me because this is where everything starts to unravel. The Indian military has built its entire deterrence posture around cold start doctrine, the ability to rapidly mobilize and deploy integrated battle groups that combine armor, mechanized infantry, artillery, and air support to achieve quick penetration into Pakistani territory before international intervention or nuclear escalation can halt operations. Cold start depends absolutely on pre-positioned forward armor that can begin moving within hours of political authorization. Pakistan has just destroyed a significant portion of that pre-positioned capability in a single 6-hour operation. Indian strategic planners now face a choice that has no good options. They can reconstitute the destroyed armor by drawing from reserve formations in central India, which requires weeks of movement and creates vulnerability in other sectors. They can maintain degraded posture in Jammu sector while waiting for replacement equipment, which signals weakness and emboldens Pakistani planners to consider follow-on operations. Or they can escalate now using air power and missile strikes against Pakistani military targets to reestablish deterrence through punishment, which risks uncontrolled escalation in a nuclear-armed regional confrontation. Let me be very clear about something based on having watched how these decision cycles work in crisis environments. When military establishments suffer unexpected operational defeats, particularly defeats that undermine core strategic assumptions, the pressure for escalatory response becomes almost irresistible. It is not rational calculation, it is institutional psychology. The Indian military has just been handed a tactical and operational defeat of a magnitude that demands response, not for strategic reasons, but for internal credibility reasons, to demonstrate to political leadership and to domestic audiences that the military remains capable of defending national interests. What happens in the next 48 to 72 hours will determine whether this remains a limited border operation or becomes the opening phase of a wider conflict. Indian Air Force assets are almost certainly being prepared for retaliatory strikes right now. Target folders for Pakistani military installations, ammunition depots, command centers, forward airfields, those are being updated and strike packages are being developed. The question is not whether India prepares to respond. The question is whether Indian political leadership authorizes execution before diplomatic channels can establish terms for de-escalation. And here is what makes this situation particularly dangerous, what keeps people who understand these dynamics awake at night. Both India and Pakistan possess nuclear weapons. Both countries have stated doctrines regarding nuclear use. Pakistan's doctrine specifically reserves the right to nuclear employment if conventional forces face existential threat. India's doctrine emphasizes massive retaliation in response to any nuclear use. The space between a conventional armored battle and nuclear exchange is narrower in South Asia than in any other regional confrontation on the planet. I am not suggesting that nuclear use is imminent or even likely. What I am telling you is that the strategic stability mechanisms that have managed India-Pakistan tensions for decades, the mutual understanding that certain red lines would not be crossed, that escalation would be controlled, that both sides understood the risks and would pull back before reaching critical thresholds, those mechanisms are now under stress in ways they have not been since the 2019 Balakot crisis. Before we move forward, I need you to understand the broader regional context that makes this operation something more than a bilateral India-Pakistan issue. China is watching this very closely. Chinese strategic planners have spent years concerned about Indian military modernization and the possibility of India serving as a counterweight to Chinese influence in the Indian Ocean region. A weakened India, an India forced to concentrate resources on its western border with Pakistan rather than its northern border with China that serves Chinese strategic interests directly. Russia is watching. Russia has traditionally maintained defense relationships with both India and Pakistan, selling weapons to both sides while attempting to preserve influence in South Asian security dynamics. A major India-Pakistan conflict forces Russia to choose sides or risk losing influence with whichever party feels abandoned. In the current global environment where Russia is isolated from the West and dependent on alternative partnerships, South Asian stability matters to Moscow in ways it has not for decades. The United States is watching. American policy has attempted to build India as a strategic partner in the Indo-Pacific, a democratic counterweight to Chinese authoritarianism, a major defense customer, and a key node in regional security architecture. But the United States also maintains complex relationships with Pakistan related to Afghanistan, counterterrorism, and nuclear security. An India-Pakistan war puts American strategic planning in direct conflict with itself, forcing choices between partners that Washington has spent 20 years trying to avoid making. Keep watching because what I am about to tell you is the part that no official briefing will address directly. This operation did not happen in isolation. Pakistani special forces do not conduct this kind of sophisticated combined arms strike without extensive preparation. We are talking about months of intelligence collection, mapping Indian positions, identifying vulnerabilities in Indian air defense coverage, rehearsing infiltration routes and exfiltration plans, pre-positioning equipment, coordinating with artillery units, integrating drone capabilities, all of it requiring a level of planning and operational security that suggests Pakistani military leadership made a strategic decision weeks or months ago that this operation would occur. The question that should concern every analyst is what changed in Pakistani strategic calculation to make this operation acceptable. Pakistan has lived with Indian conventional superiority for decades. They have developed nuclear weapons specifically to deter Indian conventional advantage. What shifted to make a direct attack on Indian armored formations, an attack guaranteed to provoke major crisis and risk wider war? What made that an acceptable option for Pakistani leadership? There are three possible explanations, and none of them are reassuring. First possibility is that Pakistan received assurances from an external power, likely China, that provided confidence to conduct this operation, knowing that diplomatic or economic or potentially even military support would be available in the aftermath. Second possibility is that Pakistani leadership assessed that Indian conventional capabilities were reaching a point where action now was preferable to action later, that the window for achieving surprise against forward deployed Indian armor was closing, and that waiting meant facing even worse odds in future confrontation. Third possibility is that this operation serves internal Pakistani political purposes, demonstrating military capability and nationalist credibility in ways that strengthen current leadership against domestic challenges. None of those explanations suggest this crisis will be easy to resolve. If Pakistan had external support for this operation, it means major power competition is now being fought through South Asian proxies in direct military confrontation. If Pakistan acted out of deteriorating conventional balance concerns, it means they see the current trajectory as unsustainable and are willing to take significant risks to disrupt it. If this serves domestic political purposes, it means Pakistani leadership needs continued confrontation more than they need de-escalation, which removes one of the key diplomatic off-ramps that usually helps manage these crises. I wish I could tell you something more reassuring, that diplomatic channels are actively working toward de-escalation, that both sides recognize the risks and are pulling back, that international pressure will contain this situation before it spirals into wider conflict. The honest answer, however uncomfortable, is that we are in the most dangerous 72 hours of South Asian security dynamics since the 2002 military standoff that brought India and Pakistan to the brink of full-scale war. Decisions being made right now in New Delhi and Islamabad and Beijing and Washington will determine whether this remains a limited tactical operation or becomes something far worse. What you need to understand is that the next few days will likely see one of three trajectories. First trajectory is rapid diplomatic de-escalation, where international pressure, particularly from the United States and China, convinces both sides to pull back from confrontation, establish communication channels, and begin negotiating terms for diffusing tensions. This requires both sides to decide that avoiding war serves their interests more than pursuing military revenge or strategic advantage. It requires cool heads in crisis, which is not guaranteed. Second trajectory is controlled escalation, where India conducts limited retaliatory strikes against Pakistani military targets. Pakistan responds with its own counterstrikes. Both sides exchange fire for several days while carefully avoiding civilian areas or nuclear facilities, and eventually establish an unstable ceasefire that leaves fundamental issues unresolved but prevents total war. This trajectory is dangerous because controlled escalation can become uncontrolled very quickly when decisions must be made under time pressure with incomplete information. Third trajectory is the one that no one wants to consider, but that everyone preparing operational plans must account for. Full conventional war between nuclear-armed regional powers fought across multiple domains with hundreds of thousands of troops engaged, producing casualty levels not seen in South Asia since 1971, carrying constant risk of nuclear escalation if one side faces existential defeat. I am not predicting this outcome. I am telling you it is possible, that the mechanisms that would prevent it are under stress, and that anyone who tells you they know for certain it will not happen is either ignorant or lying. The next 24 to 48 hours will be critical. Watch for Indian diplomatic statements, particularly whether they frame this as terrorism requiring response or as military action requiring military resolution. Watch for movement of additional Indian military assets toward the border, particularly air defense systems and offensive air power. Watch for international diplomatic activity, calls between Washington and New Delhi and Islamabad, emergency UN Security Council sessions, whether China issues statements supporting Pakistani version of events or calling for restraint from both sides. What I can tell you is that Pakistan has just changed the strategic reality of South Asian security in ways that cannot be undone simply by rebuilding destroyed tanks or repairing damaged infrastructure. They have demonstrated capability, they have revealed sophistication in planning and execution, and they have shown willingness to take significant risks to achieve operational objectives. That fundamentally changes Indian calculations about what Pakistan might do in future crises and what capabilities India needs to deter or defeat Pakistani actions. This is not just about tanks destroyed in 6 hours. This is about the psychological and strategic impact of demonstrating that India's conventional superiority can be challenged through asymmetric means, that forward deployments create vulnerabilities, that technology and planning can offset numerical disadvantage. These lessons will shape military procurement decisions, force posture choices, doctrine development, and strategic planning on both sides for the next decade at minimum. The immediate crisis will eventually resolve through some combination of diplomacy, deterrence, and exhaustion. But the strategic consequences of this operation will echo for years in ways that make future crises more likely and potentially more dangerous. That is the real legacy of what happened in those 6 hours. Not the tactical victory, but the strategic instability it creates going forward.